The Pi 500 Plus is here with an RGB backlit mechanical keyboard, and it fixes what was missing from the original Pi 500. It has a built-in SSD, and the keyboard is a low-profile mechanical keyboard with gate-around switches. And yes, you can change the keycaps, but no, you can't change the switches. Back when they shipped the Pi 500 not Plus edition, I complained about the micro HDMI ports, and well, those are still here. But they did bump up the RAM to 16 gigabytes from the Pi 500's 8. They also bumped up the price to $200. Is it worth more than twice the Pi 500? Maybe. We're at a weird point in desktop computers. You have Microsoft out there decommissioning Windows 10, so a lot of people are looking at Linux now. You have Apple making some great hardware, but then letting it down with whatever this is. And then Raspberry Pi's out here building a fanless keyboard Linux workstation like they're straight out of the 80s. I mean, it's not quite as iconic as the ZX Spectrum, but since when are we building keyboard computers? The regular Pi 500 was already good enough. I bought one for a family computer for my kids. For my house, I just wanted a small modern computer to handle school stuff like typing out and printing papers and a few online classes. It's great for that. And honestly, I like my kids using it more than like a Chromebook because that way I'm not giving Google direct access into my kids' lives. And saying that out loud makes it sound even scarier. But typing on the Pi 500 keyboard, that's not great. It's not horrible, but it's flimsy like a cheap old laptop. The Pi 500 Plus is almost double the Pi 500's weight, coming in at 1.3 pounds or 600 grams. Does it put that to good use with a real mechanical keyboard? We'll see. I'm going to split this video into a few segments, and you can skip around to what parts you want to see using the chapters. And as with all these day one Pi reviews, Raspberry Pi sent me this pre-production unit, but they haven't paid me for a review and have no control over what I'm saying in this video. They definitely had no control over what I ended up doing to this prototype.
Oh no! What did Jeff do to me?
First, performance. Well, there's actually not much to write here. It's practically identical to the Pi 500 as long as you're on the same OS and firmware release. That is to say, it's not a high-end desktop or anything, but it's silent and has enough grunt for lighter computing, like watching videos, browsing the web, and running some apps. The extra RAM and built-in SSD are nice, though for most of the things I tested, it didn't make much difference. The speed of the Pi is often hampered by these ports on the back. Just like a Pi 5 or CM5, you can get up to 800 megabytes per second internally, but the network is still stuck at Wi-Fi 5 and 1 gigabit wired Ethernet. And the USB ports on the back are USB 3, so that limits things a little compared to even a lot of low-end new mini PCs. But what if you could ignore the ports on the back? I mean, unlike a Pi 5 or CM5, this has a built-in M.2 slot. And I have janky adapters to go from that to, well, anything, including an eGPU. Now, before I crack this thing open and I see if RGB makes any difference for gaming, I asked Lumafield if they'd help me look inside, non-destructively. And they did. The Pi 500 Plus is a little beyond the physical constraints of their CT scanner, but they took two scans, one on the left side and one on the right. And there's a lot going on in here. First, the thing is dominated by the keyboard. I mean, I guess that should be obvious. But here's a look at the keys and the little metal braces and switches under each one. But we can blast through the keyboard layer without taking it apart and just look at the computer underneath. And surprise, surprise, it's identical to the Pi 500, but with a little more of the circuit board filled in. And it's always fun looking at how they optimize these things for cost when you can see inside. Like on the Pi 5, where space is at a premium, they use Ethernet mag jacks, where the magnetics that isolate power from data signals are integrated into one Ethernet jack. But here on the Pi 500 Plus, the magnetics are actually these squiggly things hidden inside this chip over here. That lets them use a much cheaper and smaller Ethernet jack since they have the board space for a separate magnetics chip. And looking at the other view of the PCB, here's the NVMe SSD chip, which uses the M.2 header that's only present from the factory on the Plus. One thing I noticed right away is missing still is a battery. To hold the clock using the RTC built into the Pi 500 Plus, you have to plug in a battery. But unfortunately, even though it looks like there's a header for it now, the actual battery isn't installed from the factory. I guess we can't have everything. Speaking of things still missing, there's a huge cutout over here for what I assume is a power over Ethernet transformer. But all that stuff over there is just dead space. I have to wonder if they'll make like a Pi 500 Plus version of this thing that also has PoE support and maybe a pre-installed battery. Maybe also an Oculink port to make what I'm going to do next easier. To do that, let's crack it open and see everything with our own eyes. Now, this is the first time Raspberry Pi actually encourages you to crack one of their keyboard Pis open. The past couple you could do it technically, but it wasn't really something I think they wanted you to do. But for this Pi, they actually have instructions for getting inside, and that's nice because you can swap out the M.2 drive, or you can do what we're about to do, install an eGPU. First, I unscrewed the screws on the bottom, then I'll use the included spudger to separate the top keyboard from the bottom shell. Now, be careful if you're doing this. There's this thin ribbon cable for the keyboard, and it's fragile, so don't just yank the keyboard off the shell. Looking at the bottom of the keyboard, you can even see they're using an RP2040 chip for the keyboard controller. That makes it easier to program the keyboard, which we'll get into later. But now we have access to the NVMe slot, and that's where the real fun begins. I'm going to pull out the SSD in there and install an M.2 to Oculink adapter. Okay, what do we have going on here? Well, there's the Pi 500 Plus, which is still open because I couldn't find a good way to route an Oculink cable through the case. But the Oculink cable is going into this Minis Forum dock. The dock has a power supply and a graphics card. This is a 7900 XT. And this is plugged into this little monitor recording thing that I can record with the monitor so you can see what I'm seeing, and then that's plugged into the Pi display. And then I took out the NVMe drive, but I still want to boot from it, so I have this little NVMe adapter back here. So it'll be a little slower, but it should still be plenty fast and much faster than a micro SD card. So to power it up, I'm going to turn on the power supply on here, and hopefully there's no magic smoke. I'm going to press the power button and see if that lights up. Okay, power on the Pi. And the Pi is definitely on. There's no signal on the screen, so it could be a driver issue or something else. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this into a regular Pi 5, which I know works with my other PCI Express setup, and that'll help me determine if the Minis Forum is the problem, or if something on the Pi 500 is the problem, or if something on the Pi is incompatible with the Minis Forum. I don't know, but I'm going to plug this in and we'll see if it powers up the PCI Express over here. So turn that on. And I'm not seeing fans spin up on there. Oh, it's the fan is getting caught. The fan was getting caught on the cable there. There we go. Yeah, so I think that the Minis Forum might be expecting something different than the Pi is putting out for its initialization. Well, I'm a dummy. There's a power button. It's kind of tucked away, hidden right here. But I think if I press this, now it turns on. So yeah, the problem is that this didn't come with a manual, and online the product page didn't have a manual. I couldn't find any manuals. So now let's see if this works. So I'll turn on the Pi. And is that going to tell PCI Express to boot up? The fans didn't spin up, but it looks like it's booting. And if you're wondering about this, I have this sitting here, my little screwdriver, just to lift this cable off of that fan so it doesn't keep hitting. I'm going to go check and see if the Pi is actually seeing. So I'll log in and use LSPCI. It's still not seeing it. Interesting. So I'm back on the Pi 500 Plus, and the fans aren't spinning. But let's go see if it is actually identifying it. All right, LSPCI, and I'm not seeing it there. I remembered on this Oculink dock that I've been using for all my other testing, it has all these switches over here to control power on behavior and how it powers up the card. And on the Minis Forum, I didn't see any switches, but I found this post on the STH forums from Matt Ventura, so thank you very much, Matt. He took apart his dock and found that there are these switches. So I went inside and found the follow start switch and switched it to the other position. So I think that this might make it work. We'll see. So I'm going to power this on. Okay. And we'll plug in the Pi. It's booting up. And will we see the card this time? Nope, nothing on there. So I guess that didn't make a difference. Okay, before I give up on this entirely, I did take off the bottom plate again. I'm just going to leave it sitting over there. And I turned off the TGX option. I was looking that up. It looks like it's some sort of weird proprietary Lenovo extension for eGPUs that lets them hot swap or something. I don't know. I don't care about that. And it probably isn't supported on the Pi. So I turned that off, and we're going to try this again. Power up the Pi. And it's initializing, power's on. Hey, there we go. That's more what I expect, and it looks like it's at least initializing the bus. So let's go over, it doesn't look like it's actually seeing a monitor output from here, but that could be a driver issue. So I'm going to go over to the Pi and see if it sees the card now on the PCI Express bus. Okay, log in. And we'll say, first let's see if it's on PCI. No. Well, I tried every switch configuration I could think of, but nothing worked with this guy. So I switched back over to this one, which I've used in the past and have never had problems with. And surprise, surprise, it works perfectly on the Pi 500. So let's get back to testing now that I know that this slot will work, and I am seeing that Broadcom Ethernet card with 4 NICs built into it. So, but we're not building a router, we're gonna game. Okay, let's see what happens now. Turning on the Pi. We have the fan spin up. Let's see if the driver initializes on here now that it can see the card. So there's no output. Let's go see what the Pi is saying. So it's definitely seeing the 7900 XT. I'm going to see what the AMD driver is saying. So it looks like there's some errors. Oh, I'm missing the firmware, of course. Silly me. I need to install the AMD GPU firmware for this thing. Hold for a second. I installed the firmware and now I'm rebooting. We'll see what happens. Looks like it might have initialized. Is there any output on the screen? No. Nothing, so maybe, nope. I saw the blue light. Look at that. Ha! Look at that. We're getting output on the screen through this graphics card on a Pi 500. I feel like Action Retro here. Anyway, look at that. And it feels smooth. Feels pretty smooth. I'm going to turn this on so you can see my experience here. And look at that, AMD Radeon RX 7900 XT. Let's see if this thing actually works. That's working. Gravity Mark is a bit of a torture test for graphics cards. Let's see how it does. Okay, I can already hear coil whine from the capacitors on here going crazy. I don't know if that comes through in the sound here, but holy cow, that's using a lot of power. And it's rendering, which other Pis I've had trouble with in the past. Having 16 gigabytes of RAM with a massive video card like this makes this a lot more approachable. And look at this, we're gaming. All I had to do was recompile the Linux kernel. And hey, I have a shirt for that. Go get it on redshirtjeff.com. I tested a bunch of games, from Portal 2, which wouldn't launch, to Horizon Chase Turbo and Super Tux Kart, which did, and everything that ran was really smooth. I could even run the Gravity Mark benchmark, and I got the highest score I've ever gotten on any Pi system, over 65,000. It's good to see the AMD GPU drivers getting so stable, and the community's been hard at work making the patches we use even better. Like this new patch that I'm using from Yanghaku, which I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering your name. It only changes like 15 lines of code in the kernel to get all this stuff working. And what about running your own private local AI models? Well, following my instructions for installing LLMs on a Raspberry Pi, I set up llama.cpp and got 108 tokens per second with the Llama 3.23b model, and it could process prompts at over 1,000 tokens per second. And the whole system only used about 300 watts doing that. So your move, Raspberry Pi, put a little hole in here, put a little grommet on it or something. We could pass through the cable and you could run pretty crazy stuff off of a keyboard computer. Like, could you imagine this is like how Apples were back in the day. You just kind of stuck cables out through the case. If there's a little slot over here, this could actually be like a supported configuration, and how awesome would that be? But I don't think most of you watching this will set up an eGPU. Looking at something more practical, how's the keyboard? Well, I've been using the Pi 500 Plus a bit, and it's a step up from the Pi 500. It's not as nice as like the 20-pound Keychron I still haven't reviewed that's sitting on my desk, but honestly, I like it about the same as my other mid-range keyboards like the Razer Huntsman that's on my desk PC. In terms of noise, it's definitely got that mechanical keyboard clickety-clack. I'll give you a short preview of how it sounds. And that's around 50 to 60 decibels from a foot or so away. It's definitely not quiet, but it's also not the loudest keyboard I've used. And for you keyboard nerds, it uses Gateron KS33 blue switches, but in gray. They're low travel, and that leads to one quirk I found with this keyboard. Most mechanical keyboards use full height keys, like this set I have for my Keychron, but these keys don't work on this keyboard. If you're gonna buy replacement key sets, make sure you buy slim ones, like these. The keycap puller that I'm actually using is one that I bought on Amazon. It's similar to the one that Keychron ships. It's a little nicer for pulling keycaps with this little guy. and switches with this, although the switches on here don't seem to come out, and I'm not going to try forcing one. They're not screwed in, but they look like they might be soldered down, so I'm not going to try that. But yeah, these are Gateron KS33, I think, gray switches. And yeah, they're genuine Gateron, that's what they say on there at least, and they feel good. They do have some bracing under the delete key, the return key, and then left shift has it. And I'm going to try to get the spacebar out of here. There we go. And the spacebar looks like it has bracing on the sides. The one unique thing is there is a power button over here. And the power button, most of these sets don't have a power button. Some of them I have seen do. The other thing I found interesting is the F keys for the keyboard brightness. They do line up with F5 and F6, I think. The problem is that there's no like global universal standard for which keys go where. So you might end up with a couple keys where you can't find a label that does exactly what it does on the Pi. But yeah, we're almost done with this. We'll get there soon. And there you have it. All but the power button removed. So depending on your key sets, the keys with the extra bracing, like enter, backspace, and left shift, they are a little trickier to install. You kind of got to get the center in first, and then kind of go back and forth and wiggle until you can get all three down. Otherwise, the key will sit up a little higher than your other keys. But anyway, now that one's working. So I did take a picture for reference because the keyboard layout is slightly different than some standard keyboards. They do use the command key, or it's the Raspberry Pi key, versus like a Windows key. But I'm used to command because I use a Mac. Debate in the comments whether or not that's a good thing. It's kind of crazy how just switching out the keycaps can kind of change the whole personality of this thing. Like I put these kind of blocky giant keycaps on and the sound is a little different, the feel's different. It feels like you're typing on candy with these. I don't know, that's a weird way to put it, but anyway. Yeah, so I kind of understand why mechanical keyboard nuts are so passionate about them. You can change the entire kind of personality of your keyboard, which is a weird thing to say, but that's kind of how it is. Yeah. And I haven't found a keycap set that works with every single key that the Pi has, but that's kind of how it is with mechanical keyboards. You kind of have to find the best match, and then you can't even 3D print these things too. They might not be quite as nice as the injection molded ones, but all of the ones I've bought have worked. They are a little slimmer, but yeah, you can change the key sets on these things. It doesn't take too long. I would recommend that you buy one of these guys because it's a lot faster than the little cheapo one that they include free with these keycap sets and the one that's included with the Pi 500. Although I don't know which one they're going to include with the Pi 500 because I have a prototype and they said that the one that was included with my prototype is not the final one. So if you go buy one, let me know what kind of key puller they have. I'm guessing it's not going to be a nice one like this, but you never know. Now, getting back to the original keycaps, one nice thing about Raspberry Pi kind of dogfooding their own chip in here is they built an app to help you customize your keyboard. You can tweak every aspect of the backlight settings and even reprogram individual keys like remapping caps lock to escape. And that's all in the keyboard's hardware. That way your customized Vim keyboard setup can even translate to other Linux distros. In terms of lighting, there's one thing that you should keep in mind. The brighter the backlight, the more the power. And that makes sense. For the Pi 500 Plus at idle, if I have the backlight turned off, it's using about 3 watts of power. With the LEDs at full brightness, that more than doubles to 7 watts. All those LEDs add up. Now, granted, for RGB enthusiasts, power draw is probably the least of your concerns, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. One thing that you can do to keep some of that RGB vibe, but save on power, is to stick to a solid color. Like even at full brightness, if I just set the backlight to red, the power drops from 7 watts down to 4.6. Anyway, I won't go into the full setup with Raspberry Pi's keyboard configurator, but I did want to highlight one Easter egg I found. You can play Flappy Bird entirely on the keyboard using the LED backlights. Now, I haven't had time to test using more standardized tools like UseVia, but I'm told that that should work, but might need another tweak or two to the firmware. In the end though, this thing isn't like a Keychron, but we're talking about a keyboard that's built into a computer. The 80s really have made a comeback. I have to make a final recommendation though. The Pi 500 is already a decent all-in-one keyboard computer at $90. Does 16 gigs of RAM, built-in NVMe storage, and a nice RGB keyboard add up to a $110 upgrade price? I mean, you have to decide that for yourself. For me, the Pi 500 I bought for my kids will keep doing just fine. It has done just fine for months. But if this is going to be your main computer, well, this is like the Lamborghini of all Raspberry Pis. The price isn't outrageous if you consider it's a mid-tier mechanical keyboard united with a low-end desktop PC. But it costs a lot more than a Pi 500 if you can live without those upgrades. Like, even for me, I have this Pi 400 that I still use around the studio if I just need a quick computer terminal. Do I need a Pi 500 Plus for that? No, not at all. But what do you think? Is it overpriced? Is it exciting? Are you going to go all out and hack in a GPU like I did? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling.